All right, we're going to take off from where we left off in the last video. So as of right now, you can see we have our React application hosted in an S3 bucket. Everything's going great. But what we want to do is we want to show you how to deploy this SPA behind AWS Route 53 and CloudFront. Like I said in my previous video, I want to start deploying our AWS infrastructure using CloudFormation, and I'll be doing that via SAM. But unfortunately, there's a few things you got to do in order to get that up and running. So the first thing you need to do is you need to download the AWS CLI and AWS SAM. I mean, you can just Google it, right? So like there's an install button for that, and SAM CLI, both of them require command line interfaces. Very easy to install, just Google it. Takes you a few minutes, and then you're good to go. You will have to configure your CLI, only your AWS CLI, not SAM CLI. And you can do that by, after you've installing it, just type in AWS configure and follow the prompts to link your AWS account with your local computer. And if anyone has any issues setting that up, just put it in the comments and I'll try to help you out. All right, after you got those two things set up, unfortunately, you need to do a little bit of work in your console before you can actually just start using CloudFront, especially how I have things set up, and let's walk you through it. So AWS is not so easy when you're using CloudFormation templates to specify specific regions during deployments. And why that matters here is that all CloudFront deployments are done in US East 1, which means that you need to have your certificates and everything loaded up and ready in US East 1. So we got to do that. But before I get a little bit too far ahead, you need to have a few things, right? So you can't deploy anything without owning a domain and having the domain registered in AWS. So that's all done with Route 53. You can buy your domain in here, but you need to have it set up here and host in, and that name needs to appear under your account's hosted zones. So you can see here, I have hosted zones, and here shows me the hosted zone that I'm going to be using. You can have it delegated. So if your corporation has let's say you have a bigger company and it's, you're not allowed to build your application on like digitalinnovationservices.com, but you're giving a subdomain like accounts payables at digitalinnovationservices.com. Those can be delegated to you in your AWS account. The big thing is you need to see it here in your hosted zone. You can also buy a domain here too as well. So if you want to buy a domain, it's very cheap. I think mine's maybe $14 a year. Very cheap. It's very easy to be done in AWS. There's a lot of huge perks for doing it. But again, need to own your own domain. Next. Okay, so you notice Route 53 is a global service. That's why I can't change to a region here. But what we want to do is go to Certificates Manager. And this is what's going to deploy our SSL and TLS certificates. In this case, it's just TLS nowadays, not SSL anymore. But we need to make sure that we go to US East 1, that's North Virginia. And we need to make sure that we have create some certificates here. So this is the certificate I'm going to be using, but I'll show you how to create it because it's very easy. Because you just hit request. This says, you want to request a public certificate. Here's going to be your fully qualified domain name. This is the domain name that you own. This is like mine that you just saw was digital-innovations-services.com. You can leave everything else here unless your company has like a very specific requirement to use one algorithm over the other. But in this case, RS2 2040 is good enough. Another thing you might want to know, so let's go like this, digital-innovations-services.com. Let's say you want to add another domain to this. Usually the big domain people like to add is like the prefix .star. So this is only really important if you're going to be running more services out of US East 1. If like me, I'm running most of my things and deploying my things in Northern California, US West 2 or US West 1, I don't need to worry about that. But that's just something you might want to do when you're creating this single certificate, so that way you can use it for different services. After you've done that, all you do is hit request, and it takes a few minutes. So what it does, it creates the CAN records for you in Route 53 and validates the certificate to make sure that you're the domain owner. That's essentially what's going on. You can see if it's eligible for renewal. You can also turn on auto renewal, so you don't have to worry about your certificates expiring. But that's all you need to do. The most important thing, though, is that after it's done, your status is issued, you need to copy your certificate ID. That's this big monster here. And I'll show you why you need it in a second. But that's all you need to do to kind of get up and running, so that way you can deploy everything with CloudFormation. All right, now that we have that kind of filtered out, let's go to the actual deployment template. So what I'm doing is I'm deploying things in what's called a nested stack. I typically don't like deploying everything in a single massive YAML file or a single massive CloudFront file or a CloudFormation file, mainly because it's a pain in the butt to figure out later, where's my S3 buckets again, and where's this thing again? And so what I do is I'm deploying them as nested stacks, which means that if you haven't seen this, and if anyone's interested, I'll probably just do a really big video on this anyway, because these SAM templates are, I can't believe how underutilized they are in most companies. But what SAM does is it allows it to you to use an abbreviated CloudFormation style, and there's a Python script behind it that transforms whatever you're inserting here into the more robust CloudFormation. So that way, when you pass all of this onto AWS, it knows what type of infrastructure configurations that you want, and you don't need to worry about the clicking inside of the console anymore. So now that we've set up our certificates, you're not going to see the console again for me. For actual creating infrastructure, I'll show you how to verify what you did. But I have all of this located on a GitHub repo that I'll post in the comments. You're free to take it. There's only very few modifications that you need to do. The first one's going to be is that, like at the very beginning of these CloudFormation templates, are going to be the parameters or variables that I want to pass into my various stacks. Usually I use something like this, so you can say, hey, what's my Route 53 domain name? This is customizable to whatever you want. I give a default value and an allowed value set. So in this case, anytime I reference CloudFormation, like this Route 53 domain name, as I pass it into my various stacks, this is actually what gets passed in. So it allows me to have a very good overview of what's going on in my individual stacks, and kind of lets me have a parent stack, and all the children stacks that I'm using get passed in variables from the parent. Or if it's in isolation where I don't need variables from the different components, like the different stacks, I can just declare parameters inside of those. So let's show you what that looks like. So here, all my parameters, this is going to be the domain name I want to use. Here's going to be my React bucket name. So this is what I actually want S3 to build for me. And here's going to be that CloudFront certificate that I just showed you that you needed to copy. This is kind of where you put it. In essence, I'm building a few things. So first I want to build my, not first. I need to build two things. First, I need an S3 bucket, but this S3 bucket is dependent here on my CloudFormation. So first, I needed to build CloudFormation. CloudFront. I need to build my, have my CloudFront distribution up and running, which references my S3 bucket. And then my S3 bucket, I will attach it to this CloudFront. So does that kind of make sense? It probably doesn't, because you need to see kind of what's going on. So inside of CloudFront, right, you'll notice there's a bunch of stuff going on. You don't need to worry about too much of this. The important ones that I'm just going to highlight are your hosted zone. Don't change this. This has nothing to do with you. This is a fixed one provided by AWS that you have to use when you're deploying into US East 1, so don't change it. This one, you want your index documents. In this case, I'm going to use index.html. This one here, I gave a 404 error, but it doesn't really matter because I'm going to ignore it in SPA, but I want you to show that you do need that error document. Remember when I was building the S3 bucket and I was configuring it, the one thing it always asks for, what is the index document and what is your error document? You can see here, anything that doesn't have a value is being passed up from my parent stack. So this is my React bucket name, domain 53, my Route 53 domain name. My hosted zone is all getting passed in from my parent stack. And here's also going to be the CloudFront certificate that we just built. And here's actually the resources. So you need to do a few things. So I need to create an origin access control. In this case, I'm just going to be defining my S3 bucket. I want to make sure that when I'm accessing this, I'm using a specific signing protocol, and signing behavior is always required. And here is my actual distribution itself. So remember I told you, like in the S3 bucket, that you need to make sure that you default into, you error into your index document. Same thing kind of happens here. So you can see here, the default is returned when the root URL is requested. This is my index.html. Again, I want to use the HTTP version 2, not 1 or 1.1. You can specify your different HTTP versions here. But this is kind of the most important case, right? If you have an error, or you have an error message, you need them to default into the index document. So that way your SPA can deal with the errors. So if it's not found, because essentially if you go to www.whatever.com/ I don't know, that's not going to be here. You're always just going to have index HTML. So even when it's 403, which is forbidden, or 404 not found, you need to default into your index document. Next thing is I'm defining my S3 bucket, S3 bucket region, and then the region that I'm deploying in this case, US West 1. I'm referring my access control origin, or my origin access control that I defined earlier. Here you go. Here's my default cache behavior. These are predefined by AWS. I give you the documentation that says, where to find this, because that was super annoying to figure out how to do that. Any aliases that I want to have, in this case, I don't. Well, my alias is going to be my Route 53 domain name, because the CloudFront has its own URL, and I want this to be used as an alias for it. I'll show you what that means in a second, because we're getting to the Route 53 CloudFront. Here's the certificate I defined, and I say the minimum protocols that are allowed. In this case, I only want TLS 1.2 or higher, so none of the older stuff, which probably doesn't exist unless you're on your grandma's computer from Windows 95. Here you go. Here's Route 53. So after I create my CDN, what I want to do is I want Route 53 to actually direct all traffic, because Route 53 is going to be your DNS lookup, right? So I want it to, when someone goes to my website, I want Route 53 to push them to CloudFront, and this is how you do it. So you just specify your hosted zone again, and you say, hey, what alias do you want, and what is your hosted zone and your DNS name. In this case, it's my React CloudFront distribution domain name. And that's it. The last thing I guess is here is I want to output the name of my CloudFront distribution ID. And I do that here because it feeds into my S3 bucket. So here, you can see this stack will produce an output that I want to be an input to this stack. That's why I said the order of building, SAM takes care of all that for you. It knows it needs to develop, deploy CloudFront before it can do your S3 stack. The S3 stack is substantially easier though, because all I'm doing is I'm passing in these 3 variables and I'm creating a bucket. That's kind of it. But I'm creating a very specific bucket, because what I want to do is first I want to make sure that all traffic going to and from my bucket is encrypted. So if it's not encrypted, it gets an error message. And the only thing I actually want to allow to grab data from my S3 bucket is AWS CloudFront service. So like if right now we're going to my S3 bucket with my specific URL, I can see all of my application. Like I can see my SPA, obviously, right? But what I want to do is I want to make sure that the only application that can access it is my CloudFront distribution. Make sense? Okay, so for you visual learners out there, what we're going to be doing is this. What I want to do is I want to move my, I want to kind of reconfigure my infrastructure a little bit. So right now, I throw everything into my React bucket. I make it exposed via static. I expose it in S3 as a public object, and then I configure S3 to serve that object. That's great, but I don't really want anyone to know what my S3 bucket is, and I don't want them to be able to access it. I actually don't want any services to access it other than the ones that I specifically allow. So what I'm going to be doing is this here. I will be restricting, in this case, I'll be creating a new S3 bucket, moving all of my React applications to it, and then it's only going to be accessible via CloudFront and S3 in very specific configurations, which are just covered. But this is visually what I'm going to be doing. So first time you're dealing with SAM, it's pretty easy. After you've configured your AWS CLI, what you do is you hit SAM build, and SAM will go through and look at your base template and understand what it needs to do and all of the references that it needs. So in this case, it knows it's going to be a nested stack. A new directory will appear here, and your build.toml will appear here that tells you, anything SAM needs to actually build this in the background, right? So to deploy for the first time, it's SAM deploy -- guided. You should do this way because you won't have your configuration file. In this case, I already have one. So I have a SAM config file or toml file, but you can walk through and it'll walk through like all of the variables that you're trying to use, right? It'll tell it, hey, what's your default region? Hey, pretty much everything. You sure you want to use this default? You sure you want to use this default? What do you want it to have with rollbacks? Just go through and answer the questions to the best of your ability that makes sense for your application. That's what you have to do first. After you're done, it'll save them as a TOML file here. So after you do that, though, the deployment process will start. And in this case, I'm going to do SAM deploy. It will create an S3 bucket to kind of store all your variables, or just store all of your templates and all of the, like in this case, it's just I just have a few template files. But if you're storing like Lambda functions, it will build all of the Lambda functions, zip them, and store them for you, so you don't have to deal with where do I put my Lambda function code in order for it to run. It deals with all that for you. You can see here, after it's done, it'll tell you the change set that it wants to do. In this case, it wants to add 2 resources, my CloudFront. Both are CloudFormation stacks. After you're done, you hit yes, and then you wait. CloudFormation is notoriously slow, and that's why DNS usually gets a very bad rap, because if you mess up in DNS with your DNS services, it takes forever to figure out that was the problem. And you usually diagnose absolutely everything else until you're like, oh, damn, it was a bad alias record, or, there's a variety of ways you can mess up your DNS, but in this case, we just wait. Okay, so what I did is I waited a bit because nobody wants to just wait on pause. So what you see is after it's done, what happens is you can see the order of which it was built. So first you can see the CloudFront stack followed by S3, and then my whole stack is considered done. One of the key outputs that I wanted to make sure was included was my CloudFront distribution ID. So at the very bottom of CloudFront, or of the parent stack, you can define what you want to be displayed at the end. So in this case, I wanted to know what my CloudFront distribution ID was, and so I gave a little description and had it appeared here. Okay, so what does this mean, right? So you might think, hey, maybe I can just go to digitalinnovationservices.com and see my application, but nope, nothing's there. Access denied. Because there's nothing currently in my S3 bucket. So what I did is, and what I would recommend you do too, is I hate deploying stuff manually because I always forget what I did. And it's not always, but it's just a pain in the butt. So what I did is I wanted to make sure that I have my CloudFront distribution ID here. And I'm going to insert it here. Everything else I already knew. So I knew the name of my S3 bucket here, because when I come up here, I defined what I wanted my S3 bucket's name to be. So after I do that, I can deploy this code, right? So let me save it first. And you can see here how to deploy that. So let's just deploy React S3 bucket.ssh. So you can see here when I'm deploying it, all I'm doing is I'm copying all of my files from, I'm removing the directory. So I'm removing everything inside of the S3 bucket. Well, first I'm deleting the contents, and then I'm copying everything from my React dist directory into that S3 bucket. In this case, if you have a cache set, you want to invalidate the cache because Route 53 stores things, right? So it's a CDN, Cloud Distribution Network. So it stores all of the files in a cache for quicker access, depending on when people are grabbing it globally. So let's actually do that because it's kind of important at the beginning. Not really, but I'm going to do it anyway just to make sure that my demo works correctly. You can see here, the cache kind of breaks down what's going on and which pass you're invalidating. In this case, I have just one because a single page application means I only have one. And now if I come back here and I reload, I should see my React application. And now you can see it's behind my digital intervention services. You can also see that I don't have that secure issue anymore because I can go to here and see all this information to show that, I think Chrome's a little bit better for accessing the actual information of your certificate. But either way, it is secured. It's using HTTPS. I can see that here. And that's how you deploy your application. If you want to make any changes, the beauty of this type of setup now is if I want to change something inside of my React application, so let's say I just want to delete some stuff, or if I just want to, if I want to do whatever I want to do, really doesn't matter. To deploy them now is very quick. So let's say I wanted to get rid of this logo thing. That's fine. You just do the same steps I showed you before, npm run build. Here you go. And now I can run the same application again. I want to clear the cache this time though, because one thing I didn't show you is that if I come here and I inspect my page, ooh, God, what's the hotkey on Mac? There we go. And let's just run it, and I'll show you afterwards. So after I clear it, bloop, what I'm expecting to do is have that little bottom section of my application be gone. Now, when I do that, I expect that little bottom section to be gone. So that's how fast it is to develop now, right? Want to make new pages? Want to do whatever I want to do? Totally easy. Do it in React, test it locally, make sure it's all square, load it into S3, clear my cache, and I'm good to go. So thanks so much for watching. Like I said before, I'm still very new here, so please like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions about SAM, cloud distribution, CloudFront, SAM templates, or any kind of general AWS React questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll try to help you as best I can. Thanks so much for watching.